for instance, when you last came to Japan, the advanced technology you had access to then made certain things possible for you then that weren't before.
Exactly.
And with, say, the presentation of the Passions on these flat plasma screens or LCD screens, that was not possible 10, 20 years ago.
No,
so
it's true.
is there something, to turn it the other way around, is there something that you would like to make that you have in mind but the technology isn't there yet for you to make?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I've always wanted to see my mind thinking while I'm thinking. And I recently met this extraordinary biologist, two biologists, or cognitive scientists, Hannah and Antonio Damasio. And Antonio Damasio and Hannah were telling us about this. We had dinner with them. They were telling us about this system they have for imaging the brain while it's in the process of thinking. And they can see the thought, you know, where the thought patterns move. Basically, it's reading kind of a version of heat energy where the blood's flowing in the brain, but it's clearly connected with our thinking. So, I mean, I've always wanted to do that, but I think really the real issue is not the technology and I have total faith that human beings will keep developing and expanding and pushing this technology and other technologies, and they'll always give us new opportunities. So I don't really even worry about that. I think it's up to the artist to understand the inner technology of their own thought process and make sure that it's as pure and honest and direct as it can be. And then it will come out and flow into the things of the world just sort of naturally. You know, it's not a problem to think of you know, that to find a use for these things. I think the danger is, I think, which was beautifully described by Abraham Maslow, who's a 20th century American psychologist. And his comment on technology was, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to treat everything as if it were a nail. And so you have to be very careful when you pick up cameras and recorders and things, to realize that someone else's attention, intention, and assumption of how this instrument will be used is built into that instrument. So it already is acting like kind of wagon wheel ruts in the ground to sort of channel you and move you in a certain direction based on a set of assumptions by the designers. And one of the great things that has happened in recent history with artists is artists will pick up a tool and use it in a completely new way different than what the makers ever intended. And so that kind of creative liberation is really, really important, especially in today's age where a lot of these tools are being used. I mean, cameras are being used as weapons. 9/11 was not about flying a plane into the World Trade Center. 9/11 was about putting on a display in front of one of the most media-concentrated places on Earth, Manhattan, where every camera in the world would be turned on that event. So it totally, the weapon used in 9/11 was the image, not the plane. And so that kind of way of thinking and understanding things now is really important for artists. You know, artists really need to be aware of what the impact and effect of their images is going to have.
Specifically, the work Heaven and Earth. That's a work which, how to explain it? Well, what intrigued me about it was that you chose to expose the cathode ray tubes. That I think the images transcend the technology, and yet the technology is still visible. You chose to expose it rather than to have that part of the TV set encased in the columns, but above and below. And I just wondered if there was a particular reason for that, or if it was, in what way that connects to the images.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like about the essential point, you know. It's like you know, removing your clothes in a way, and baring your breast, you know. Like it's about uncovering something, and it's also when things are exposed, they're vulnerable, and that it seems fragile. You know, if you look at your TV set when it's in the box and it's on the table, it doesn't seem that fragile. I mean, you know, if you drop it, you'll break it, but when you see those tubes and they're just supported by these little thin metal posts, you know, and you know it's glass. It's like a light bulb. Yeah. It's a vacuum, and it seems very, very fragile. The way the two human lives are fragile that it's representing. So it was just a way to continue the intrinsic nature of the content of the piece with the form of the piece in terms of how it was displayed. So the fragility is just something that we live with, and the incompleteness is also something we live with. Those are incomplete television sets, you know, really. And the two beings being portrayed, our son Andre when he was like a week old, and then my mother when she was in the last week of her life, you know, are both themselves incomplete, fragile beings. And of course the only way you can ever sort of jump the gap between being and non-being, or between birth and childhood and old age and death, is through the image, is through light, is through intangible things like love and light and knowledge and memories. And you know, if we don't have those, we perish. The very first evidence of human beings we have on this earth are, among the oldest, are two notches, two cuts in a reindeer antler from, you know, 40,000 years ago, found in a cave. And of the thousands of reindeer bones found in the cave, one of them has two notches, and as soon as you see those two notches, you realize that was a human being presence, and that bone becomes more than a bone. And in the ancient world, the Greeks particularly were highly aware of this issue of this gap between us, and the river that you traveled across to go to the underworld, the river Styx, was called the river of forgetfulness, because they knew that when a human being passes, and you get on the boat with Charon, the ferryman, and he takes you across to the land of the dead, that the inherent problem of human life is that individuals die. When individuals die, they die with the knowledge of the group. So the fundamental problem of human beings, human life to be solved, is how do you get across the river of forgetfulness and keep the knowledge? How does the knowledge of the group not die with every individual? And the only way it can do that is through stories, teachings, and through physical things leaving marks. That's the only way we can do it. If we didn't have those two things, there'd be no progress of ideas. So this media is actually part of that system. It's part of the way to get across the river and not have the knowledge perish with the person who's leaving us. So that's really why we're here and why we're working with all of this stuff, no matter how high-tech it is. Basically, that camera there, that digital camera, is the same as that reindeer antler with bones with two marks in it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.